He who is inexperienced in the higher pleasures will tend to turn to the lower pleasures. Already right there, you have a line that speaks volumes about our culture that is obsessed with sex, which we can connect to the dearth of an appreciation of the higher, richer, spiritual things. What simple, deeply integrated joys are we training? If you don't train your young in good pleasure, they will have to reach for the easy, low-lying fruit that you get without training.
Hi, I'm John Cutterback.
And I'm Sofia Cutterback.
If you're wondering whether you can really be friends with your spouse
And raise children into responsible adults with whom you have a relationship.
and do what it takes to make a homestead, reconnecting with your body and the land wherever you live,
If you just want to think more about how to make a truly happy home in our trying times,
then the Intentional Household, a LifeCraft podcast, is for you. Join us.
Welcome, everybody. Always great to be together. Pleasures of the body for training in chastity. I just want to tell you the origin of Sofia and I wanting to have this conversation right now is we've been, teaching a LifeCraft course on work, doing a lot of reading of some great authors, Romano Guardini, Wendell Berry. And we had a conversation this morning that just really excited us about this. And in short, yes, we want to suggest and think here together with you about how to train ourselves in chastity. All of us need to continue formation in chastity, young, old, in between, through having better experiences of real and rich bodily pleasures that are deeply human and that tend not to be experienced anymore today, such as the good, real pleasures of work, good work, bodily work, work with our hands, the real pleasures of eating, of walking, of writing with a pen, a whole host of kind of normal, what I want to call human bodily pleasures. And I'm going to just start by asserting, I think we can say one reason that our young people, maybe all of us, struggle more even perhaps than we should in the area of chastity is we are not having the kind of rich bodily experiences of rich bodily human pleasure that we should in other areas. And so we tend to turn to the realm of sexuality simply to experience bodily pleasure and a closeness to our own body.
Yeah. This course on work has been very interesting. It's actually been unbelievably exciting for me. I actually find the notion of work to be very complicated and difficult. So I'm hoping that we're going to be able to keep talking about it from different angles. I've just found it surprisingly enriching as we've gone through it. And obviously, work is something that is very much connected to the body. But I just want to draw you out a little bit, and I'm going to say from memory something that I feel like you've said about chastity before, but I want you to correct me in case this is wrong. The connection of body and bodily pleasures to chastity feels kind of intuitively more obvious. The connection of work to chastity seems a little bit harder to understand, which obviously this is part of what we're going to delve into. But even before we talk about that, I guess the prior question is, why are we talking about chastity? Like, chastity is a little bit, feels like it's a compartment, an increasingly small compartment from the perspective of the world. It almost feels like it's the kind of thing, well, for people who are kind of hyper, we're going to talk about chastity. But you've said in the past that I think St. Thomas is the one who says that you can't really see unless you're chaste. Have you said that to me before?
I have.
Because it seems to me like as I think about that, that underscores why are we talking about chastity? Chastity, well, I was about to say chastity is much more than kind of appropriately limiting one's bodily interaction on the sexual level with other people. Now, I said only, but I think actually if we were to delve into that deeper, we would say, wow, you don't say only. It is amazing what that's connected to too, and what that kind of, and maybe in the end, kind of recognizing the richness of what chastity is, helps us see the connection of why it is that only a chaste man can see. So if that's true, that only a chaste person can truly see, then it becomes really imperative for us. Wait, we do want to be chaste people. Like that should be a primary object for us. And then it's kind of a cool thing to think about, okay, if I'm pursuing chastity so that I can see better, it's part of God's design and plan that my body is involved in that. It's not just a cerebral event to see better, but that God has designed it that our body doesn't get left behind.
Well, and you're saying this brings very clearly to my mind. What we have before us, in certain ways, is the whole ball of wax, the whole human thing, through a very fascinating angle right here. So I think, what are we going to do right here? I think in this discussion, we're going to go to the heart of what it is to be human, and talk about the rich interaction of the spiritual and the material, or of soul and body. We're going to talk a little bit about what chastity is and understand that in its richness and beauty, and how that connects. It's not everything, but it connects to everything. And then how this is deeply and wonderfully practically connected to how we work, how we eat, and our various and sundry other daily ordinary practices in the home, including also, this is going to help us think more about the importance of how we use technology or don't use technology, because technology very much affects how we use or not our body in the daily things that we're doing. So this is going to allow us to connect.
I'm excited about this.
Good. I am too.
Okay, so it sounds like a great place to start is to talk about chastity. Define it a little bit and just delve into what we're talking about when we say chastity.
Good. And let's keep this focused, though this is a very important foundation for everything else. And again, it's profoundly connected to our understanding of what it is to be human. And I just, again, want to say that again out loud, because chastity formation, which obviously is so central, again, for everybody in all homes, and to some extent in schools, in monasteries, among old and young, is to recognize in play here is a virtue that is a kind of key, is a kind of beautiful integrating factor. I want to mention here Bishop Varden, I think it's Varden, has a book on chastity. It's called Chastity, Reconciliation of the Senses. It's a very popular book. It's a great book. He's emphasizing in there how chastity is a very full-blooded virtue. It's a beautiful thing. It's a profoundly human thing. And one of the things he keeps referring to is chastity is always about integration. It's about integration of body and soul. And in that way, I'd say that way, chastity is a profoundly human virtue. Chastity in its primary signification is something that the angels have no concern about, right? Angels are going to render what's due. They're going to be just, but they don't need to be chaste. Chastity is a virtue that especially speaks to the beauty of the human calling and is key to our kind of keeping ourselves together in a whole way, receiving the gift of our bodiliness, and how the bodily is who we are. But at the same time, you can also say in and through the body, we live out spiritual things. This is very obvious in the realm of sexuality, the marital act. Talk about living out spiritual things, living out, it's called the marital act, living out this astounding, profound reality that is, first of all, or in the most important sense, the spiritual one, but it's also essentially embodied. And chastity is going to directly protect, in its most obvious meaning, is going to protect the full beauty of the gift of marriage. Marriage in its this beautiful union, total covenantal giving, and in its generosity, in its procreative aspect. So just that we begin with a sense of chastity, kind of through the eyes there of Bishop Varden, of a uniquely human virtue, one that is about receiving the gift of body and soul, and recognizing our bodily desires and bodily pleasures must be cultivated in the way that they were designed to be, in a perfect harmony with spiritual realities and pleasures too.
Yeah, wow. That just strikes me. I'm just beginning to realize the magnitude of chastity. If it's this integration of the body with the spiritual, the bodily goods with the spiritual goods, just strikes me that Adam in the garden was designed to work even before he fell. After he fell, it was toil for him to work. So he kept working, but it was toil. Why was it toil? I wonder if it was because his desires and his appetites were no longer integrated with his body. So when his body worked the soil, he experienced it as something that he struggled with because he needed to now integrate his emotions and his interior, his spiritual side with his bodily. Whereas before, the desires and appetites of his spiritual life would have been in keeping with his bodily activities. So anyway,
that's huge.
it's a little bit of a
Actually huge.
side note, but
no, it's not. It's not a side note. That's actually very much the point, and it fits perfectly with where I wanted to go. But it's actually a little bit different, or bringing out an element of it that I hadn't realized. The story of Eden. I'm normally looking at this more through philosophical, though of course, always philosophy in service of theology. And I love, and the biblical is always the highest. Theological is always the highest. But that angle there of what immediately struck me when you said that was now through our toil, our bodily toil itself is a kind of image of the toil of becoming chaste. Barton actually addresses this also of how it's messy. It's an arduous task. And think of it this way, this is what really struck me in your going to Adam. All of God's punishments are at root a profound remedy. And so the very toil of our work is itself key to working out, coming back to reintegrating. And chastity is all about reintegrating. And I dare say then working well, this theme that we consistently emphasize of work is an ordinary form of human life, an essential daily. In fact, for most of us, it is the main way that we act as humans every day is in our work. So it's going to always be in a special way in our work that we need to be working out our salvation, becoming ourselves, developing our interior life, developing character, relating to other people. Work should be something that does all these things. And here, what we want to talk about here is how we experience work is very much part and parcel of. Here we're kind of saying it's a kind of when we said, hey, pleasures of the body for training in chastity. I want to suggest here that working in a certain kind of richer way, cultivating the real pleasures of work is key to training us in chastity, helping us understand, experience, feel pleasures the way God intended.
Yeah, and I suppose it's the training for chastity because it's the proving ground, it's the testing ground, it's the exercise mat for integration with our body. If the work of chastity is the integration with our body, then other work, the work of the day and within the house, is actually the place where we get to exercise, an opportunity that we get to exercise in integration of our spirit and our body.
Great point. Then you asked me, let me just say something else about what chastity is, because I just hear we need to go to here St. Thomas, which is the backdrop for my mentioning Bishop Barton. But the traditional kind of definition of it would be the habitual desiring and acting in accordance with reason in the area of our sexual desires. Put in a slightly arranging that, chastity is putting the order of right reason into our sexual desires. And then, of course, then also consequently our sexual actions. So one key thing to see there about chastity in its full richness, its kind of full-blooded beauty, is it's different than what Aristotle and St. Thomas call continence. Continence is having the strength to say no to your disordered desires. And that's a beautiful thing. And very, very often what people think is chastity is actually continence. And sometimes from the outside, you can't tell the difference. There's looking a person over there who is acting according to the moral law, respecting other people, living according to his state in life. It might just be out of continence, which again is and certainly not bad.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
You're able to restrain your bad desires. Rather than act on them. But this is always in the beautiful notion that we have to credit Aristotle saw this so wonderfully of virtue is not just restraining bad desires, it's ultimately transforming them. And this is particularly challenging in the area where due to the fall, there's this kind of concupiscence that we experience, and that's a disorder, especially that shows up in the area of sexuality.
What do you mean by concupiscence?
Concupiscence basically just means a disorder, a lack of subjection of the lower desires to right reason. And so it's a kind of exercise of concupiscence when if a man sees an attractive woman and is attracted to her in a sexual way, this is a movement of concupiscence because our desires should not go towards someone to whom we are not married. Now, we would say, well, it's very understandable. Someone would even say natural. We don't have to sweat the details of this too much. In an important sense, it's not natural. It's very understandable. And in the fallen world, we are so used to our sexual desires being aroused in contexts where they shouldn't be. We just kind of consider it to be natural. Well, that would not have been the case if it weren't for the fall. In other words, our sexual desires would have, as it were, this is very hard to picture, waited for the direction of reason. That sounds so stultified, but actually it's not. It's actually incredibly beautiful. What was called original integrity of Adam and Eve. And it's what the virtue of chastity is moving in the direction of doing again, of being like unto that, where our desires move according to reason.
Yes, you use the word integrity, the original integrity of Adam and Eve. And this is exactly what we're talking about. Integrity versus disintegration.
Integrity is integration, right? No,
Right.
perfect. So in any case, while in this life, it might be the case that due to original sin, we never achieve even what Aristotle would have called chastity in its full sense of this full integration of desires. Nonetheless, it can be, especially by the help of grace, achieved in a very rich way. And it's important that we know what we are striving for. So the traditional notion of chastity, again, is this integration of desires, meaning the lower desires move in accord with. And there's so much to say about that. That there's so much. What exactly does that mean? In some sense, only he who achieves it knows fully what it is like. I just say as a sidebar of St. Thomas saying, and I love to point it out, he says, no one experiences the pleasures of the marital act like chaste spouses. This is such a profound point. Chaste spouses, where there has been the order of reason, which has come about in large part through restraint, willingness to say no to oneself, as well as a whole set of other reasonable exercises along the lines of the kind of things we're going to be talking about here, a whole approach to life that prioritizes the spiritual and sees the bodily in service to it.
So is that why St. Thomas would say that only really the chaste man can really see things as they are? Because the chaste man practices the right relationship between his desires and the material world. And so his desires never obscure or filter in a wrong way his interaction with the exterior world.
That is a
And
huge
so
part.
that's
And
that so you're really seeing things as they are, because when we have a passion that's disordered, it actually becomes the filter through which we see things. And so we no longer see things as they are, but we see them through the filter of our passion. When our passion is properly ordered, we experience the passion, but it doesn't obscure that which we're looking. It doesn't become a filter. It allows things to be seen actually in the right relationship one to the
that's
other.
exactly right. Beautiful whole point in itself, worth discussion. More another point in time. I say that beautiful insight from Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas and others as appetite affects vision. Good appetite actually empowers vision. Bad or disordered appetites hinder, block, darken your vision. And so, and there's always more richness there. The wise have always said, going all the way back to ancient Greeks, that the sensuous man will not see. He will not see, he will not understand. Beginning with, he doesn't see the other sex. He doesn't see the realm of sexuality, even for what it is. But then that expands out to other things too that he doesn't see. So there's much richness there that again has always been passed on, not in a fearful way, but in a way in recognizing the beauty of it's the pure in heart. This is at least in part what our Lord was adverting to. When he says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. So there's a lot. I mean, purity in heart has a number of forms. All right, do you mind if I go on then and say another wonderful point about St. Thomas? I think we'll connect this back.
Yeah, that'd be great.
St. Thomas, I love this point, right? It's there in Plato and Aristotle too. St. Thomas says it directly. He who is inexperienced in the higher pleasures will tend to turn to the lower pleasures. He who is inexperienced in the higher pleasures will tend to turn to the lower ones. Already right there, you have a line that speaks volumes about our culture that is in many ways obsessed with sex, which we can connect to the dearth of an appreciation of the higher, richer, spiritual things.
Mm.
Everybody needs to have something to take delight in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but I just want to, I want to interrupt. I want to actually say back to you what you said, but in a way that actually has a little bit of a clarification. You said we live in a world that is obsessed with sex. I think you have to be careful how you say that, because what you're saying is they are obsessed with the bodily aspect of the sexual experience, right? It's a disintegrated aspect. So unfortunately, we say the word sex and
Right.
it can refer to just the bodily act, but it also can refer to the bigger, the unitive nature of it, et cetera.
Sure.
And so I just want to clarify, because I think what you're saying is sex isn't lower in the sense of everything that has to do with that realm is lower. But when the sexual act is I wouldn't say disembodied. It's separated from its larger context of the unitive and the personal.
Disembodiment,
It-
believe, actually.
yes.
But go ahead.
And reduces it simply to the physical, then it becomes lower. Then it becomes like what you observe in animals, et cetera, if it's
Right.
just reduced to the bodily. And so I just want to be careful so that nobody walks away from this saying, John and Sofia Cuddeback think that sex is low. And somehow what we're advocating is some kind of abstract, mental, cerebral unity, right? So no,
Okay, great.
because
So
because I want to keep the focus here. This conversation is about the beauty of the integration of the body and what it means to be human,
Right.
which is
Right,
more
right,
than just bodily, right?
Well, then let me try to say that back to you. I think then what you're saying there is what I should say, to be clear, when I say that we live in a culture obsessed with sex. It's obsessed with bodily sexual pleasure in abstraction from its own natural context and
right.
home.
Exactly.
And of course, it's very much connected with contraception, a technology. Technologies affect profoundly how we live. There is a technology that profoundly affected how we live and experience the realm of sexual pleasure,
Mhm.
even because it empowered those who wanted to do something that concupiscence tempts us to do, namely to be able to just go
To
for the
abstract.
sexual pleasure itself apart
Bodily,
from
simply the bodily. Yeah.
personal relationship, procreation, generosity, self-gift.
Mhm.
That is a disintegration. The technology of contraception empowers you to completely separate what should have been,
Yes.
what should have been integrated.
So I have to ask you another question, though, before we move on, because you said those who have not experienced the higher pleasures tend to go toward the lower pleasures.
Mhm.
I'm going to ask you to explain what the higher pleasures are. So I don't think that what you're saying, that higher pleasures consist in something disembodied, cerebral. Now, often we do say spiritual, but I think what you're saying is higher pleasures can be those which are experienced in the body, but in a way that is not separated from and disembodied from the spiritual goods, right? So we're not just talking about the higher goods are non-bodily pleasures. The pleasure of thinking about great music, or I don't think that's what you're saying. That is a kind of pleasure, and it may be higher, but you're not excluding a bodily experience when you say higher pleasure. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. Let me try
So
to.
maybe you can give us an example of.
Right, well, let me. How about if I put it to you this way? I think we can say this. The more spiritual, the higher.
Mm-hmm.
But spiritual is, but spiritual things are enacted in and through the human body.
Mm-hmm.
Now there are,
Yeah, for human beings, that's certainly the
Aristotle
case.
says, arguing that contemplation of the highest things is the ultimate end of human nature. Aristotle argues this. St. Thomas Aquinas argues this, using Aristotle's argument in complete agreement with it. They argue that the pleasure of contemplation, which is primarily an intellectual gazing, is the most high and continuous human pleasure that there is. It is the highest and most continuous pleasure that is available to the human person. In its higher reaches, first of all, it can be, here is an interesting thing. A separated soul right now that is in heaven is having, the highest human pleasure by gazing upon the face of God in an intellectual vision. And so but I wouldn't say it's higher precisely because the body is not involved, but it is higher. It is the exercise of a power that is not itself a
Yeah.
bodily
It's not
power and
material.
not
Yeah.
itself a bodily operation. So the highest joys, pleasures are in the operations of powers that are not themselves bodily powers. And so those spiritual goods are ones that in an important sense transcend the realm of the bodily.
And so then, so would we say, while it transcends the realm of the bodily, when the bodily is experienced in consonance with the spiritual good, it elevates the experience of the bodily into a higher realm than if it were simply bodily disconnected. So what I'm asking is that the way in which a bodily pleasure can be experienced as something higher, as you can have a higher pleasure that includes the bodily pleasure, the physical experience of pleasure, when the bodily experience of pleasure is always connected to and contextualized and ordered to the higher good,
And
right?
I know we need to give some examples here. And this is exactly where we are. And this is exactly what has been striking me here about, go back to what I said, I think will be a central theme of our discussion. The true pleasures of work, especially I'm always thinking about in the home, the true pleasures of work in the home are a main way that we can and should for ourselves, for our children, for our loved ones, that we experience this profoundly human aspect of pleasure, of how is in a sense, primarily or in its higher reaches, it is a spiritual good. But given that we are humans, this spiritual good is reached and enacted with an essential bodily context, especially when we're in formation. It's especially as regards the raising of our young and the developing of the immature, which can mean people that are fully grown in body, though still not fully mature. It's like St. Paul saying, first you give them milk, right? And that's scriptural. This is really important. In the formation of people, there's this aspect of cultivating the young, the immature. Well, the bodily is especially important. Consider how with the mother with her baby, she first of all is going to convey her love, which is itself most of all a spiritual reality. She is going to convey it in a bodily way. She embodies her love this is profoundly human, in her eyes, in her hands,
in her care,
in her touch, in her care. Right. And so this is beautiful. A reality that is most essentially a spiritual one, given that we're human, also has this essential aspect of being embodied. So the higher goods from the start, we are training ourselves, but look, right now, let's just focus on the young. We're training them to experience spiritual goods, again, in and through their body. This has obvious implications for, I love to reflect on changing diapers, I think is a God-given gift of something that it needs to be done as often as it needs to be done. Was God giving us a context of bodily needs that would give us the opportunity to express in bodily ways to the young who right now especially need to be communicated with in bodily ways. We're communicating something that is first and primarily
a spiritual reality.
Well, this continues. And the thing that is the real point here, what I want to focus on now, is how good work in the home and also I'm going to say the pleasures of eating, the pleasures of work, the pleasures of eating, and a whole set of other very embodied pleasures are ways that we all should be cultivating / have cultivated in us our taste of spiritual goods. Again, I go back and I don't know if I said this very directly earlier, but I say it now. And one of the main reasons that young people, this isn't a complete explanation, but a main reason or significant aspect of people turning to pornography, of turning to this kind of, it is disconnected, even in a sense, embodied sexual pleasure, is they're not experiencing higher bodily pleasures that are shot through with the spiritual. They don't have the pleasures of being able to use their hands in an artistic way, in a way that is shot through with the beautiful meaning of handcrafting.
Mm.
You know what has so helped me see this is reading Wendell Berry. He has an article called "The Pleasures of Eating." And there's so much we could talk about right now of how eating, you can reduce eating to simply the bodily pleasure of the taste of the food, but the real pleasures of eating are much richer. That here I am with my loved ones, here I am with food that maybe I've grown with my own hands or someone has lovingly made for me. There's so much that should go into the richness of the pleasures of eating, which Wendell Berry says by and large we've lost today. Even though we tend to be obsessed with how things taste, we've lost the pleasures of eating. In a similar way, he talks about how we've taken pleasure out of work. We have made work be this kind of necessary evil that's completely pragmatic to produce exactly these results, right? And so we've lost the pleasure of real beautiful human bodily work. What, in short, it is. Am I really want to drive at and tell me what you think? That we need to form ourselves. We need to form the young, and having integrated experiences of bodily pleasure through good work, through eating, through certain types of family time together that's profoundly embodied, but is shot through with spiritual significance. These are higher bodily pleasures that actually then train the soul in the direction of integration, trains the soul of what richer bodily pleasures are like, that should not ever be sought in a way that disembodies them or disensouls them, which is also to disembody. Because if you disensoul it, in a sense, you're disembodying it too. But I know I just said too much.
Okay, well, I just want to share at this point, when you're talking about the pleasures of eating, and that Wendell Berry means it's an experience, a bodily experience that is connected to spiritual goods. He doesn't say it that way, but he's saying the spiritual good of growing it ourselves, preparing it together, eating it with our loved ones. Okay, these are all spiritual goods. I understand what you're saying intellectually, and something about it makes me go, oh, that's it. But it feels very, like what I'm seeing is very ephemeral. Like I can't, like it slips through my fingers as soon as I close my hands on it. And I wonder if part of the reason that I have this feeling, part of it is actually a little bit of a defensive, like, well, I mean, gosh, if I buy my milk at the grocery store, does that mean like I'm disembodying myself? Or like, oh my gosh, does that mean I have to actually like bring in wood and lay a match to the, like, so there's all kinds of ways in which I get subconsciously defensive when I hear about like, oh, the connectedness, we have to be more connected to the food that we eat by preparing it. I wonder if part of that is so many of us, all of us, are living in a world where kind of even on the most fundamental level, most of us are buying what we have at the grocery store and not involved in its production. And so I feel like there's almost a defensive stance of going, well, we're all good people still. Like, it's okay. I know a lot of good people who buy their food at the grocery store. And I wonder if the answer to this kind of self-defensive response is, don't worry, you don't need to defend yourself. The thing that you're being invited to do, that I'm being invited to do, is to ask the question. It's not to put a judgment on those of us who are living according to like actually the circumstances that the world we live in. So it requires a little bit of a detachment from an immediate judgment on, oh, what am I doing? Am I not enacting things properly? And just going, we just need to see why it is that being more closely personally connected to the production and preparation of our food actually keeps us connected to the spiritual good that is therein. I feel like that's the thing that I need to keep focusing on. I keep getting distracted by the practical issue. And I feel like that's something that kind of requires like literally sitting with it, because we live in a world that frankly is largely habitually disconnected from spiritual goods. So we're going to actually have to practice thinking about that connection a little bit in order for it to become more obvious. I mean, I'm realizing for myself, I just need to sit with that for a bit. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't go on in our conversation, but I'm just, in case there are other people who are listening to this who are going, that's a little bit what I'm feeling like, and we just need to go, the connection is there. Just sit with it. And also, I wonder if not just sit with it, but try it. to the extent that you can, do something that's a little more connected. Actually, there's a great quote here from Wendell Berry that I'd love for you to share that is helpful in making that judgment about how to implement a little bit more connectedness.
Dear, let's 50,000 feet. This is a reason for great hope. There's nothing to be afraid of here. The beauty of a good, well-lived human life is always in our power, especially by the grace of God, a generous and loving God who has designed this to give it to us, to be this gift, this astounding gift. If we are humble, if we're willing to be courageous, if we're willing to persevere and receive the gift, we can discover the integration of soul and body we're designed for. We can do it in simple daily ways. And it doesn't mean you're gonna have to stop doing everything that you've been doing up to this point. It's even if there are things, it is true. Many of the practices of our age are are disintegrating factors. In fact, Wendell Berry has shown me so much on this. And let me just here is something very hopeful. As the connections have been broken by the fragmentation and isolation of work, they can be restored by restoring the wholeness of work. I'm going to read on in a moment, but I pause. I take this as he's talking particularly about household, and we know philosophically household is the home of human life. What works for the disintegration of home life is going to be the disintegration of human life. This is why I've just written this book on the intentional household, living as if people matter. This is about to come out, not quite out yet, coming out in April. This is the focus of the ordinary ways of life in our home. We now can see the disintegration, the coming apart, the loss of these things has cut at who we are, has cut at our relationships, has cut at so many of the connections that make up the web of human life.
Especially the connection between the person and their own body.
Wendell Berry likes to give a little series of connections. You and your own body, you and other persons, you and the earth, which of course, ultimately all these, he doesn't emphasize this as much, but it fits perfectly, and you and God, because all of these integrations are themselves integrated. All these connections are connected. But he makes an historical claim that the central means of the coming apart was the coming apart of how we work in our home. But that to him in us, if it can be a source of hope. As the connections have been broken by the fragmentation and isolation of work, they can be restored by restoring the wholeness of work. I read on. There is work that's isolating, harsh, destructive, specialized, or trivialized into meaninglessness. And there is work that is restorative, convivial, dignified, and dignifying, and pleasing. Good work is not just maintenance of connections, as one is now said to work for a living or to support a family, but work is the enactment of connection. It is living and a way of living. It's not support for a family in a sense of an exterior brace or prop, but is one of the forms and acts of love.
Wow, that's incredible.
Which of course means
unbelievable quote.
It can be delightful. It should be delightful. This is not nostalgia. There's the realities. This is why I've written on the joys of the gift of as you know, the central things I share in the book of what we've learned from doing pig butchering, slaughtering together as a family. The astounding form of shared life that was and things that we discovered through it. Angels would never have such a situation. They'd never have such a conversation. But our humanity is in a unique and special, and I dare say even primary way, experienced and enacted, thus either in an integrated or disintegrated way in our work. And again, I say we talk about the pleasures of eating, the pleasures of work. I don't mean to be reductionist, but it so strikes me to say our young people and us, we have so few experiences in our body where we feel really alive in our body in deeply meaningful ways. And let's face it, unfortunately, turning to pornography and the things that go along with pornography is a way, I think, often, I'll say reducing it to this, a person might just be looking to have an intense bodily experience where I feel alive in my body.
Yeah.
note the slight
Mhm.
obsession people have now with going to the gym and
Yeah.
working out and
Yeah.
so forth. Wendell Berry points
We're
to this.
desperately
Oh,
reaching for an experience of our body. Yeah.
the Amish don't have to go to the gym. There's a reason
Mhm.
for that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with going to the gym, but honest, maybe we need to go to the gym because we don't have other more, as it were, integrated ways. But there are ways of using our body in joyful, integrated
Yeah.
ways in our
Yeah.
work
That yields something that the gym does not
that you
yield.
split. And that's
Yeah.
why, for me, I reach out to, among other things, splitting wood
Mhm.
is a profound, for me, spiritual and bodily pleasure at the same time. It's not like, oh my goodness, splitting wood just makes my body feel so good. When people speak kind of glowingly, as I do, of the experience of splitting wood, it's the whole person experience,
Mhm.
especially when you're there with
With other
others.
people, sure, yeah.
Even if you're not talking to one
Yeah,
another,
yeah,
just
yeah.
being in
You're
their
doing it
presence.
together.
It's the exact same thing where I talk about I love working in my garden and planting seeds. There is an absolute bodily pleasure of having your hands in the earth. Hey, honestly, it's not like it's not like astounding feeling of bodily pleasure putting
Mhm.
my hands in dirt. No, but the wonderful thing is it is an integrated one of I am a body.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
can do these things and often even with the sweat, the
Mhm.
labor, but when you connect that with all the other richer connections that human bodily labor should be shot
Mhm.
through it,
Mhm.
this is an integrating life experience that think of that. Think of our young people and how they have been robbed of those integrating bodily experiences.
Mhm.
So, pleasures of the body for training and chastity, working in the garden, splitting wood, writing with a pen. It's just listening to Wendell Berry talk about that in his 1980s article, Why He's Not Going to Buy a Computer. You and I aren't in a position where we're going to be able to not have a computer. At least most of us are not. But he was in a situation, he's still alive, that he was able to not have a computer. He was still able to write with a pen. That we're going to have to be savvy. We're going to have to be creative, and we're going to it's baby steps. Is it just choosing certain areas in our life where we reach for these things and having a good pen on good paper and that scratch? There's an astounding sense of connectedness to your body,
Mhm.
especially then when you're writing a letter to a person that you have a meaningful relationship with.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. I just want to say back a couple of things too that are striking me as you say them, just to kind of pull some things together. When you said planting seeds is not the same experience of your body that chopping wood is. Chopping wood is like you're feeling your muscles, they're beginning to ache, et cetera. This is a little bit the experience in the gym. Planting seeds doesn't have any physical exertion except for maybe your back begins to hurt from bending over and your knees begin to hurt from being in the pea gravel. It strikes to me that you're actually experiencing your person through the medium of your body. You're experiencing your body working in conjunction, not conjunction, but consonance with your will and intellect. You're experiencing this seamless togetherness of your spiritual powers and your body serving the spiritual powers by acting. That seems to be like when I think about that kind of integration, that does seem to be the preparation for saying my bodily desires in the realm of sexuality work together with my spiritual
Mhm.
capacity and
Mhm.
judgment in recognizing the right time, the right person, the right context. And now I can fully enter into the act.
Amen.
And so I want to kind of focus in on that kind of almost experiential moment that can be found in all kinds of things, not just planting seeds or chopping wood. It can be, spreading bread with peanut butter,
Yeah, I'm gonna give another example
exactly.
just like that here in a
But
second,
although
which you'll
spreading bread
appreciate.
if you're doing it for your child who's sitting across the counter from you, then it is incorporating not just your will, but also your will for the sake of something greater, which is interpersonal communication through love, right? So there are certain kinds of bodily acts that have a little bit more of a narrow band because unless we're thinking about how we're serving the family when we're doing it, it's not as obvious or apparent.
Mhm.
But they are all exercises of consonance of the body and the spiritual and immaterial power of man, which is incredible.
It is
It is
incredible.
incredible.
And so even if some of the philosophical reflections here have seemed kind of woo, kind of out there, don't worry about it. I think we all are capable of experiencing this aspect of the beauty of these deeply human things that speak to our hearts. They make our hearts swell with joy. In a sense of the joy of being human and the richer human things, which is exactly the Lord came that we might have life and have it to the full, including on the natural level here. And so here's another easy example. Is making food, making meals from scratch. The joy of using your hands. It is such a joy to me that I can with a nice sharp knife, slice a side of bacon into, they're not perfectly uniform, but they're uniform enough pieces of bacon. But it only comes with practice. And so we have to practice these things, these skills, these arts. What about the joy of being able to use a needle and thread to make something? These traditional home arts are ways of having deeply integrated, embodied experiences where there's a connection of the spiritual to the bodily, integrated because often we are serving, we are acting out of love, and how we're using our mind and using our hands all comes together to be doing something that produces fruits that are enjoyed together. These are the simple human joys. We have lost some, we're not teaching our children these things. And again, I ask, what simple, deeply integrated joys are we training? Because joys, you need to be trained for pleasure. If we don't train, Plato saw this, if you don't train your young in good pleasure, they will have to reach for the easy, low-lying fruit that you get without training. Is this not the world we live in, where they're always looking for the next Hostess Twinkie? So that's a serious case of the 1980s, right? I don't know what they're, what
the current addiction is.
What they're reaching for there, or of course the drugs, or
the phone, or the social media,
or in any case, then just the distraction. Let's give them the simple things, the pleasures that train them to be ready for higher pleasures yet.
It sounds like what I would kind of put all of that together by seeing being good doesn't mean leaving the body behind, the body and its pleasures behind. Being good can only be achieved if we integrate the body and its pleasures.
Amen.
But I have to say, speaking of the bacon and it being, mostly even, but sometimes not, can I just read this little quote from Wendell Berry? I just think it's such a beautiful affirmation of the good of the body. It says to reduce or shortcut so this is from What Are People For in the chapter Feminism, the Body and the Machine. He says, to reduce or shortcut the intimacy of the body's involvement in the making of a work of art, that is, of any artifice or anything made by art, inevitably risks reducing the work of art and the art itself. In addition to the reasons I gave previously, which I still believe are good reasons, I'm not going to use a computer because I don't want to diminish or distort my bodily involvement in my work. I don't want to deny myself the pleasure of bodily involvement in my work, for that pleasure seems to me the sign of indispensable integrity. And that was actually not the quote I wanted to read, but that's how I snuck it in. But
we do have to wrap.
I know. So let me just say, he says,
but I know which one
yes,
you're
it's
going
this one.
for. Read
the body characterizes everything.
That was a great one too.
I know, that was just me sneaking in an extra. The body characterizes everything it touches. What it makes, it traces over with the marks of its pulses and breathings, its excitements, hesitations, flaws, and mistakes. I just absolutely love that. On its good work, it leaves the marks of skill, care, and love persisting through the hesitations, flaws, and mistakes. And to those of us who love and honor the life of the body in this world, these marks are precious things, necessities of life. I know that there are people, perhaps many, to whom you cannot appeal on behalf of the body. To them, disembodiment is a goal, and they long for the realm of pure mind or pure machine. The difference is negligible. This is really powerful. Their departure from their bodies, obviously, is much to be desired by them, but the rest of us had better be warned. They're going to cause a lot of damage on the way out as they're departing from their body.
Partially, I think he's saying because that's what a theme of machines tends towards disembodiment. And I think what he's saying is these people are the ones it doesn't mean the bad will, but they're pushing the technology. They're pushing the automation of everything upon us because they look down upon, don't appreciate.
They're not
the
afraid.
things that
Yeah, they
we're
don't
saying.
realize
And
that
then-
they're
right.
severing the body from
and,
the man.
And so we are now going to have to be intentional about re-embodying ourselves, as it were. But we can begin in small ways. It is going to take saying some no's. But as we always love to remind ourselves, your no is only as strong as the
your
yes that's
Yeah.
behind it. We can picture, let's imagine the shared life of these beautiful embodied experiences in what are going to need to be largely untechnologized activities. Not that sometimes they will involve technology, sometimes they will. The point isn't the technology, the point is to have embodied pleasure.
All right. Can we just, in light of that, can we share Wendellberry's very practical advice about how to draw some of those lines, or make a judgment as how do we do it? He says, and this is from, actually, you don't have it cited where it's from, but I think it's just going on from
the Feminism Body and the Machine and What Are People For?
It says, if you are already solving your problem with the equipment you have, a pencil, say, why solve it with something more expensive and more damaging? If you don't have a problem, why pay for a solution? And yet, if we are ever to have a world fit and pleasant for little children, we are surely going to have to draw the line where it is not easily drawn. We are going to have to give up things that we have learned, in only a few years, after all, to need. So we're going to have to give up the things that we have learned to need. I know a man who in the age of chainsaws went right on cutting his wood with a handsaw and axe. He was a healthier and saner man than I am. I shall let his memory trouble my thoughts.
So again, thank you. That is very helpful. But it's not about the technology.
No.
But it's about, in view of the goods we're seeking, are we willing to draw certain lines, especially when we're talking about the young, to start them out in life? But it's not just the young. We're all,
at this point, we all need it.
Craving this.
Yes.
And higher things in mind is preparing us for the higher integration. Well, here, thank you. So much more to keep considering.
Yes.
I always love this conversation with you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks for tuning in this episode of The Intentional Household. If you've enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and leave a rating or review. If you have any topic requests, please send them to lifecraftgroup@gmail.com. For our Wednesday reflections, free courses, reading groups, and live events, please visit life-craft.org.